in part one of our latest video series on making a speeder handle for the mini mill vise. I showed you this example that I made a while back, and we talked about how you would make one of these and went through some of that process. But I wanted to show you today how to make this very simple version that doesn't require a rotary table or digital readouts or any special accessories in order to make it. So this is about the simplest one I could come up with, and I thought I'd show you how to make one of these. You can make it and use it while you're waiting for the next video to show how to make a better one. But anyway, let's take a look at what's involved in doing this one. I started with this piece of medium density fiberboard, often called MDF for short. Well, first I'm going to cut off a small piece for our project. I'm going to use my radial arm saw that I bought secondhand back around 1974, somewhere in there. Next, I want to mark a center line on the workpiece. And since we're doing this old school, or crude school I guess we'll call it, I'm just going to use this random block of scrap aluminum and a pencil. And I do this sometimes when I'm working out in the field, so to speak, and I don't have a better option available to me. But I'll just draw one line, and I'll flip it over, draw a second line, and now the center is going to be right between those two. And I could try turning this on its tall side. Probably get a little closer. But the point here is just that even without a height gauge or any other fancy tools for a job like this, you can come pretty close to the center with nothing more than a chunk of something and a pencil. Now I'll use this other cut off piece of scrap. Should be reasonably square. We'll use that to mark our cross line. Then our center is going to be right there. You've probably seen this old Tony's video channel, YouTube channel. I'm going to borrow a trick from him and move forward in time and use the finished handle to work the vise to make the part that will become the future handle. So with time travel, which Tony uses frequently in his projects, you can accomplish these sorts of things. Going back to our plan from part 2, we found that the largest drill that would fit within the hex that we want to make is either 12 millimeters if you have one, or you can use a 15-30 seconds, and I'll use a 15-30 seconds in this case. I'm going to do the drilling on the mini mill. I'm going to drill the hole out first with a 13-30 seconds drill. There's nothing special about that size. I just chose it more or less at random, but I wanted a smaller size drill to drill the hole first, so that when I go in with the slightly larger drill, we should get a cleaner final diameter on it. And you'll see this produces a lot of fine sawdust, which can be pretty messy. Now we'll drill that out to 15-30 seconds. Well, now we need to turn the round hole into a hex hole. In the interest of keeping the tool requirements simple, I'm going to use a hand file to do that job. But we want to get the hex lined up evenly around the edges of that circle. So according to our plan, the distance across the flats we want to be about 12.2 millimeters. So I was just looking for a nut that's about that size. This one's from an 8 millimeter bolt, and you can see it's about 12.9 across the flats, which is a little bit bigger than we want, but that's okay because we're going to file it to size, so we can sort of approach that size gradually until it press fits on the handle. We need a way to center this nut around the hole, otherwise we're going to not get an easy pattern to follow when we're working with a file. So I made this little spud thing or stub on the lathe, and the diameter is chosen to fit inside this nut, and then the other diameter fits inside this hole. That should fit on there. Okay, now that ensures that the nut is lined up with the round hole, and now we'll just trace around the nut. So I'm just going to use one of these fine tip Sharpie pens. I'm going to hold the nut down because I don't want it to move. What I'm trying to do here is just create an outline of the nut that we can follow when we're filing. So you don't want it to shift positions when you're marking around it on the outside here. Alright, there we go. So now we should have a nut-shaped outline that we can work with. I'm going to start working on the hole with this fairly coarse square file, and it does a good job of getting those corners started. So the idea is to do basically what we did with the mill, milling down on the corners there, but now we're going to do it with a file instead. So we'll just rotate it around manually. Keep the flat side, each of the flats in the down position or the lower position. Because this file is tapered, this hole probably is also going to end up slightly tapered, but that's okay because I want it to fit, the wide end, we'll call it, to fit over the outside of the shaft, and then as we push it in further, I want it to fit snugly on the shaft of the vise. After it starts to take on a roughly hexagonal shape, we can bring it over to the vise and do a test fit, but it won't slide on, so we need to work at it with the file for a little while longer. Okay, well, after some work with the file and some test fits, I got it to the point where it fits over pretty well. Actually a little looser than I would like. I wanted it to be more snug than this, just so it will stay on, but it will work okay. So you can just turn it like this. So now we got to bring it to the final shape. I just sketched freehand on here the approximate outline that I want to end up with. Then I'm going to take it over to the bandsaw and cut it out. Of course, if you don't have a bandsaw, you could use a hacksaw probably, or you could even mill it out on the mill if you wanted to. So I'm just going to cut the round part freehand, and then we'll round it off on the belt sander, and then I'll use a guide to cut these straight parts. I can put my earmuffs on and my safety glasses. I don't like to get my fingers close to the bandsaw blade for obvious reasons. So I use this little L-shaped guide and the second board kind of grip my workpiece in there for situations where that's convenient to do it. I think I want to remove a little more along the top here. Usually if I was doing a job like this, I'd take it over to the belt sander and smooth out these corners on here. But since we're doing some old school low-tech work, I'll go ahead and use a hand file to do that. Well, since I'm not really a woodworker, I don't have any or very many wood rasps or anything, so I'm just going to use a regular old metal file on this, and it's a fairly coarse cut, so hopefully it'll do reasonably quick work on this. I'll use this smooth file. This is a single cut file for some of the finer work on here. But again, it's a metal cutting file, but it works okay. I don't think this will hurt the file in any way. Probably a little slower than using an appropriate woodworking file, though, I would guess. But you'd have to ask a woodworker to find the answer to that. Well, after about 15 minutes of work with an assortment of 2 or 3 files, this is how it ended up. It doesn't look too bad. You know, it doesn't have the real even symmetrical form that you'd have if you used a rotary table. And of course I could have, if I had just taken a round disc or something and drawn a circle instead of just drawing it freehand, this would have come out a lot more round looking. So there's no reason not to do that, and you can certainly take whatever time and effort you want to make it as nice as you want. But what I wanted to show is that with just some basic tools and some basic techniques, you can make a useful part that will serve a purpose in your shop. And of course, when you get a rotary table and a DRO and all the other nice things, then you can make the ultimate version, the Mark III version. Well, let's try it in action here. And it works pretty well, so you don't even need, you could put a little roller handle on it, but you don't really even need that. You can just work it with your finger. I had hoped to have a more snug fit on the vise handle, but I filed away a little bit too much, and the disadvantage of that is it tends to slide farther in and hit this base of the casting. But it's relatively easy to control just using your finger, so it's not a big deal. If you really wanted to fix that, I guess you could put a little epoxy in there and let it harden, and then file that out again until you got a better fit.